this working? Oh, thanks for the great introduction. And thanks for everybody for hanging out through the conference. I know there's like a lot of information being thrown at people. I know these kind of sessions can be really dense. I know like consuming all of it can be a lot all at once. And I'm here to tell you that I'm not going to help. I'm going to throw a lot of high-level questions at you. And I think my talk actually being at this point in the conference is really beneficial because I feel like everybody has done a really good job of giving you a lot of tactical things to really digest when it comes to your role and how you're treating your groups and everything else. And my talk is going to go over pretty much the high level of all those things, but it's really going to go over the scope of like, what does it mean to maybe start off as a CTO? But I also wanted to put in a hint of, we have a lot of existing CTOs here. Like, what if you get hired into a new group of 50, 100 people, 200 people, and you need to kind of take in that role, set expectations, and start anew? So it's hopefully everybody walks away with at least one or two things to think deeply about. It's not going to be any particular rules or things I will tell you to do, but a bunch of thought processes. Well, I didn't even pick up my clicker. There we go. With that, I will say that I'm, like a lot of people here, I am an introvert. I do not like talking about myself, but for the relevance of my talk, I will go a little bit into my history. I am DwayneForde. I'm a CTO over there at Mantle. We're across the street. If anybody's a Toronto native, I will grab a coffee anytime. I love talking leadership, tech, everything else. I have been a leader at 6 different startups, ranging from B2C, B2B, consulting, doing SaaS, doing on-prem at large scale. I say this because I feel like the CTO role changes very drastically across all of these things. And the way that you approach the role needs to be really contextual towards the problem that you're solving. So that's why I feel like I'm going to go over a bunch of these large discussions. But one of the companies I was a part of was Extreme Labs. It was a consulting shop. We ended up getting acquired into Pivotal. I switched to R&D to really large-scale on-prem. So at Extreme Labs, I managed 40 people. We ended up growing to 350 people. At Pivotal, we grew to about 5,000 people, and I had a reporting org. I started with 15, grew it to 150. And then over at VMware, I was a senior director. I ended up having a reporting structure of 200 people across many different countries. Again, I mentioned this because I'm going to be going over how the CTO role kind of evolves over time and how, as people, we kind of need to evolve with it. Oh, I wanted to quick ask, out of the people here, how many people are managing a group of like 10 and under? Just want to like have a bunch of personal anecdotes. Oh, great. What about like 50 to 10 to 50, around that range? Ooh, a lot. And what about like 50 to like, I don't know, like 500 or above? Ooh, awesome. Okay, cool. Hopefully everybody walks away with a little bit of something. I wanted to begin my talk with kind of talking about the CTO role at all. I remember when I got this topic from Hannah, it was kind of on her sheet. I remember it was the first thing I saw, and I was like, that's so high level, I usually stay away from conversations like this. When we started Mantle, we actually did a personality test. And at the top of my kind of personality traits are non-negotiable kind of like life traits that the person said I had on my list. The first was helpfulness. So I feel like I need to be helpful to people. And when I go into high-level discussions, I just feel like it's less helpful. The second thing is empathy. And the third thing was openness. So again, I'm going to be discussing a lot of opinions. I just want to give you a sense of what my leadership style is like. It might not match yours. And as I go through a bunch of different techniques, I want to definitely put a few different structures of leadership into people's minds, but just know it's going to be biased in my particular way of doing things. But I will say I love this kind of conversation because as I mentor and advise different companies, starting this conversation is really, really valuable. Understanding what role you want to have as a CTO is probably one of the most important things you can do for your journey. And sometimes it's something that gets swept aside as you're executing day by day. So I just wanted to go over why I love the CTO role, right? The creativity and flexibility, I think, is just amazing. I will say that all my art is AI generated. It does get funny when they say that all the text has been figured out with all of the models. It hasn't been. You'll see some examples. But I love the creativity and flexibility of a CTO role. Once you're in the role, you kind of have a blank slate to kind of design an organization and a culture and a group in a way that you think is going to be most effective around the problem that you're trying to solve. And I think that's a very special role. I don't think it's something you come across often, to be at the top of something, to really design in your own makeup. You can always be where you need to be. Again, at the top of my list, I like to be helpful. So whether it's technical, organizational, cultural, everything else, being able to jump around the org and fix the problems that you really, really care about to make sure it's still working functionally, I feel like is really important and really a blessing of the role. And then seeing it all come together, I think sometimes we take for granted the field of vision that we have as leaders, and seeing all of your groups coming together to deliver something and delight customers, and seeing that whole system kind of generate something unique, I think is really, really, really special and something that should be celebrated. What can be difficult, and I feel like sometimes we don't talk about the difficult stuff enough, with all that freedom can come a lot of anxiety, right? You don't know when is it make the right decision at what time. The chief example I have is when you're in a consulting business and knowing when to hire. Like, we would have so many customers that would be like, hey, let's start an engagement, and they'd be like, okay, and then over like a year later, they'll call you on a Friday and be like, let's start on Monday. And when you're in a consulting organization, if you have people kind of not on projects, you're just burning that money. So what do you do in those situations? There's no right answer. You can be the entry point for chaos. I think this is something that we all need to manage and be very, very aware of. As the head of an organization, you'll get all the good and all of the bad. And you'll get all of the interesting things thrown at you, right? I'm sure all of us are at the whim of our CEOs, probably bugging you multiple times per week saying, like, why can't we generate everything with AI, right? I'm having a lot of those conversations. It's a good conversation to have, but it's still something that you need to do every day. I think there's definitely I think it's becoming more obvious to folks that multitasking is something that will lead to sadness in any human. So it's something for us to really, really keep in mind as we go about evolving our roles. And then a lot of decisions can just feel like optimizations. And I say this because I came up from the engineering world. And when you switch, well, at least for me, when I switched from engineering to leadership, I went from a world where everything was green and red. Things either worked and scaled and customers were able to access it, or it didn't. And when you went to people leadership, you understood that you have all the information, but you never really know what's going to work out. And you kind of had to put yourself out there, make decisions, don't wait too long, and go through those iterations. So the one thing I ask people to, whether they're going from an existing CTO role into a new company, or if they're starting from scratch, the thing I ask them is what kind of CTO do you want to be? And you might not have an answer for that on day one. I think that's completely fine. But it's something to keep on asking yourself. I think one really important aspect when you're considering the CTO role is, where do you fit into the C-suite with your other leaders in the organization? Because if you look at the gambit of CTOs out there, there are some that are super hands-on, right? There are some who are super hands-off. There are some who love doing presentations, being completely go-to-market, hanging out with customers, and there are other ones who are sitting next to engineers. I think there's no one right answer, but I think people need to choose a strategy for how they want to evolve their role, stick to it, and grow with it over time. I think one really interesting example is, Toby at Shopify. He will randomly show up in people's meetings while they're designing things, right? He wants to be extremely hands-on, and he optimizes his organization around him wanting to do that in the organization. So, and then the CTO takes a little bit of a backseat from that, and he actually goes and does more special projects. He actually offloads all of the organizational work to one other person in the organization. So That's not my particular thing. I like being close to my teams and everything else, but just to give a perspective of the different ways that you can structure a CTO role and just kind of making it work for you. I think a really important thing is crafting a vision. I think, in the previous talk, strategy and figuring that out and make sure people are aligned. It's something to think about. Again, it doesn't have to be done day one. And I think it's important to note that you don't have to be kind of like a Steve Jobs kind of take on it. A vision is open. It's an open breathing thing that will grow with your team. When you're day one with your group, your vision and how you align is just going to be like a casual conversation. All the way to that Carter talk that we just had, we did the same thing at Pivotal. We had practice leads that would go out to every different team and make sure that those practices were being permeated into every group. But it's important to really apply those learnings or those techniques at the right time so that you're not going to be overwhelming people. There you go. So when you're kind of crafting your vision and you're starting with a new group, you want to know what the current state is. And one thing I want to point out, I feel like a lot of people have been really good at explaining this, like really taking stock of your organization. But I think it needs to be a very careful balance between the organization, the business, and yourself. The organization I define as like the people and processes. The business I kind of define as the kind of like the business that's an entity in itself. What is the brand? What is the revenue? How healthy it is? And then yourself and how you want to fit in there. So I mentioned, what is the current state? What kind of hard skills do you have in your organization? What soft skills do you have in your organization? How is that all going to come together to create a sense of camaraderie with folks. And then I usually end up thinking about how I'm balancing all these things as a leader. And I end up with like kind of this CAP theorem type thing that I'm optimizing day by day. I'm not sure if anybody else kind of feels this way. But like one example I'll put out there is, we were year one at Mantle, and at Pivotal, we kind of had a separate team to do like SOC 2 audits. Like the business had made a decision to optimize that away from the teams. And when we're a small team, we didn't have that option. So when I'm going through SOC 2, it takes a certain amount of time, energy, very distracting. So I knew the business needed it. I know the org would really suffer from it because it would take probably a month away of work away. So I decided to take that on myself, right? Sometimes, another example is I was once interviewing for a CTO role, and during the interview, the person one of the founders was like, hey, our only goal for our business right now is to hire 200 engineers in 1 year. And I was a little bit like, I took a step back and I'm like, okay, like that's a lot. I could have taken up that challenge, and he was saying that the business needs it. But I was telling him, I'm like, have you considered the impacts of what your org is going to feel from that much growth in a short amount of time? Keeping cultures together, team practices, and everything else, that can be a huge stressor that you also need to balance when it comes to the business needs and what you want to do as yourself. My ideal outcome for a vision is having an engineering culture where people know what you value in terms of your culture and engineering practices. I think it's really important to make that really clear and visible to folks. Previous talk says definitely write it down. I believe in writing it down and saying it and living it every day. People will always look at your behavior. And I think there are very clever ways to do this. At Mantle, what we do is we say that our culture is pretty much centered around dates, feedback, and ownership. So we always make sure that every conversation has an owner. It doesn't mean they do the work, but they're the right person to facilitate the conversation. At Pivotal, Pivotal spent a lot of time training people on giving feedback and making sure that feedback was timely, actionable, and respectful. So we practice that as well. That means that everybody in our organization can look to the left and right and expect a base level of empathy and be able to give feedback to and from each other at any given point. And then dates is one of my own little CTO thing that or metric that I've developed over time. I've seen a lot of CTOs kind of try to gauge health of an engineering group via amount of commits, amount of features going out, and everything else. I personally like dates because it helps me capture, one, the knowledge pool of my group. So if we need to accomplish something and somebody's not able to give me a date estimate, that is my trigger to say, like, okay, I'm either going to give you the time or the training, or I need to pick up hiring in that sense to be like, now we can do date estimates around there. If I get a date estimate on something that I feel like should be short and is very long, maybe that's a trigger to start refactoring something. Like maybe we're overlooking a deficiency in the system and we need to look into it. Or sometimes it's just people are calibrating their estimates as an individual, and I'm able to help with that person work through those things. So those are the general metrics that we have at Mantle. In terms of guidelines, I think it's really important to really set some at least high-level guidelines of how you want people to iterate. As a person, and I don't know if it's because empathy is on my second point of my list, I feel like everybody has a certain amount of creative energy. And I think it's been, I feel like in my career, there have been people who have come up to me with solutions, and I know it hasn't hit the mark. It's not something that is really going to contribute to our vision, and I can kind of feel the energy being sucked out of them. Like we put effort into that, it didn't work out. And I kind of take that like on myself. Like I should have done a better job of setting guidelines and a vision and everything else. I think once you have a really good vision, those guidelines and everything else, people really know how they want to be helpful. Or if they're motivated by that vision, they will put their hands up. And it won't be absolutely everybody, but at VMware, when I had a group of 200 people, I was very vulnerable about what challenges we were kind of going through. And it was always amazing to see people put up their hands and say, like, hey, I think we can do this, I think we can do that, and really go through those paces. And then I feel like the home run success in terms of like a vision and guidelines is when people are able to internalize it and repeat it to other folks. I feel like in terms of when you're giving a vision, and especially when it's a large group, you get a bunch of blank stares and you never really know if it lands. My key metric for that is if they're repeating it to other folks, because there's always that person that was on vacation when you made a change or anything else, or if there's somebody visiting the office or they're talking to a friend, if they are re-articulating that vision in their own words and it's really landing, I feel like that's really good. I think the other unintended kind of consequence of having a really good vision and good guidelines and how people can be helpful in your org is it actually leads to a really strong hiring network. Like once you kind of nail these things, you'll actually notice people will start talking about their problems to their friends and in the public a little bit more. And because they're able to articulate the value and what they're doing and how it goes up the chain, I've actually noticed for it to create a very, very good hiring network. And this is my last one, execution. Again, I probably should have said the agenda, but I didn't want to go to the CTO role, the vision, and the execution. But these are a few more tactical things, and this is where I have a lot more like anecdotes. These are more things that I've seen a bunch of startups maybe try and maybe miss the mark on, and maybe a few things to just like make or do a double check on if you're going to implement in your org, and a few bits of advice there too. But it is important to note that sometimes AI thinks we need to have 5 arms to do our jobs. That was not prompted for that to happen. So one thing that I noticed, so like our group at Mantle, we've actually spent the last 10, 15 years working with each other. Very experienced engineers, most of them enterprise experience. And one thing that comes up, especially when you're starting a new project. I feel like a lot of experienced engineers have this like sense of like, I'm going to do it right this time, right? Like I was in a box before and now I've been unleashed and I'm going to do everything different. And sometimes you can get into these like, religious battles. Like I never would have thought that, these folks that I've worked with for so long, like they legitimately got into a debate around tabs versus spaces, like legitimately. And I'm like, oh, like it hurts my soul that they're kind of spending their energy on this, to be honest. We have like a lot of things to do. So those are the kinds of things where I'll step in and be like, hey, I love that you're all passionate about what we're building. I love that you want to do a really good job. But if you spend more than 10 minutes talking about this, I'm going to come in and just make a decision. So I think there's a lot of these little things that people can get stuck on, especially when they're really deep in the weeds, like figuring out things. So I think our jobs as like a CTO is really be able to like kind of jump in and kind of nudge things along sometimes. I think also when it comes to the CTO role, what you're doing today will not always work tomorrow. I definitely subscribe to the idea of like every time a group doubles in general, you need to reassess everything that you're doing. So like, while you might not need practice leads and a centralized kind of strategy group today, at 50 people, do you need it? Sometimes, some orgs maybe at 100, maybe at 200. At some point, you're going to have some fragmentation, and you're going to have to put in these mechanisms. But it's always good to use a certain number or a certain milestone to really reevaluate things. I think a lot of times you'll get stuck in the day-to-day, just getting things done. And it's really, really valuable to take stock of all of your processes and do a complete reevaluation at any given time. I think one really, really good example of this is at Pivotal. Our CEO had spent his whole career preaching that engineering groups should take their software from inception all the way to production for every release. They should own that whole pipeline. And at Pivotal, when we had a lot of customers, the Fortune 500, American military, and everything else. It was on-prem software, and it had to go to a whole bunch of different hardware segments and all the different clouds, China, right? And it was just too much for each individual team to handle at some point. And he had to let that go. We had to have a release team. All the software went to this release team. They had a huge gambit of hardware that tested across things, and they would give feedback back to the groups. But that was really hard for him to do. Like that was his belief system that he actually put into the company up until like 5,000 people. And everybody truly believed that, and he had to walk back from that in order to make the company successful. So some of these transitions can be hard. Some belief systems need to be, strongly convicted but loosely held. And I'll say like, don't be overbearing. I mentioned the Toby example. Some people do find that to be a little bit intimidating and everything else. Again, he chooses to run his org the way he wants. He's very successful. I'll never judge him. But I will say, if you want to get like peak creativity out of your group and motivated, you don't want to be micromanagey and put them in too tight of a box. I'll say this all day, every day: automate, 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 and purchase. Especially these days with AI, I think everybody's getting used to the coding tools, but in terms of getting AI solutions inside of products, I'm seeing a lot of people struggle, or a lot of engineers struggle with the undeterministic nature of putting those things in their solutions. Again, used to things being red and green, my test pass and everything else. When the data science world starts crashing into the traditional kind of like product engineering world, I'm really having to make the space for my engineers to really get used to that and put in the cycles and really evolve what that looks like over time. Again, don't recreate wheels. If you have a team of really strong builders, like sometimes like I'll catch people down, I'm going to make the perfect date picker. I'm like, please don't. Like, please just go find an open source one. It's probably good enough. I know you do a great job, but like, we have other things to kind of work on and do. And I think somebody else mentioned this yesterday, like keep your processes as simple as possible for as long as possible. Once things get complicated, it becomes really hard to undo them, because usually the complications end up manifesting around people. So even when you're going and reevaluating your organization every time it doubles and everything else, try to keep it as simple as possible. Team health and growth. I'm coming up on time, so I'll move a little bit quicker. But this is a really important point. I run into a lot of folks who have an initial engineering team, and they have a certain problem with the sector of their group, and they think that hiring is going to fix the problem. They can hire out of it. And I urge people to flip that perspective around. And I say, hey, if you have 10 people today and you go up to 100, if you have an issue with 1 or 2 engineers, are you okay with 10 or 20% of your organization being like that at the end of the day? Because it doesn't matter what you say and what you write down, people are going to look to the left and right and look at people's behavior and emulate it. And they're going to think, that's okay, right? So sometimes you have to make a hard decision. Maybe you have to right-size the team and everything else and kind of continue forward. I would say beware of incentive programs. That's a typo, sorry. Beware of incentive programs. I was once at Extreme Labs, we once had a consulting, or we were making, for a large automaker, we made their first version of their mobile app. Does navigation, unlocks cars, locks cars. Had some really bad bugs. It had a release date of a certain date, and the PM said, we're releasing this no matter what. I need to send my kids to college, right? And that's because his bonus was tied around a release date, not around the quality of his work. So those are the kinds of things that can happen with incentive programs, where people can try to game the system, maybe misinterpret, and ultimately, if you're going to congratulate them for a certain behavior, they're going to take it, right? And I would say always hire with intention. Again, I'm a person who, as soon as I join a group, I'll say, like, I'm bad at celebrating. I am not the friend that people call to start the party. So I actually look for those kind of hard and soft skills when I'm like joining or I'm doing a group. Like, do we need more front end? Do we need more back end? What are the largest questions that people are asking? I take a tally of those, and I'm like, those are the kind of roles that we need to either train or hire as a group. So yes, I'm a little bit over time. So with that, hopefully I've given somebody at least a little bit something to think about when it comes to their CTO role, how they grow over time. And yeah, I hope that you all have a wonderful CTO journey. And thank you.